Well, with what you might call the spooky season upon us, with Halloween right around the corner, a perfect time to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the novel Frankenstein. It was written by Mary Shelley when she was 18 years old and first published anonymously in January of 1818. And it is a book that has gone on to inspire other writers and creators for all these years. Spencer Stuart is a book historian, and so I invited him in to talk about Frankenstein and what makes it so special, why it's lasted so well. And to start off with, for anyone who's never read it or maybe forgotten it or somehow managed to miss the numerous cultural references, costumes, plays, and movies based on the tale, some of which are based on a completely faulty take on the tale. Anyway, Spencer Stuart, I asked him to just start by describing the story.
It follows the structure of sort of a frame story, meaning kind of a story within a story within a story. There's been an analogy used that it's like a Russian doll, and I think it's a really good way of discussing it. You know, it begins with letters of a ship's captain who's on his way to the North Pole. He's writing to his sister and going, "You never believe this person I picked up on the way to the North Pole," and it's Victor Frankenstein, who's of course kind of trying to seek out the creature that he's created and who's taken everything from him effectively. And so it begins with this story of this explorer, and then it goes into the recounting of making the creature through the voice of Victor Frankenstein. And then it then goes into basically a story told by the creature to Victor Frankenstein after he has killed people who were connected to him, his family relatives, basically, because he's sort of born into this meaningless existence where he's trying to figure out what's going on, and Victor Frankenstein is effectively his creator. He's sort of looking to him for guidance and for some sense of reason as to what's going on here. And of course, Victor Frankenstein is, left the scene almost immediately. As soon as he starts moving, he's just terrified by what he's done. So there's this bind that takes place. Anyhow, so that's kind of the general structure of it. And within that, it's the story of a man who's really trying to play God through scientific exploration. And that's one of the questions that it still brings up today. That's why it's still quite relevant, is there's these discussions of AI, artificial intelligence, and bioethics as well. What are the codes and ways of behaving around the possibility of generating life?
And then the whole idea of, I guess, for them too, the whole idea of the soul, right?
Absolutely.
And what is that? And
yeah,
is that manufactured or
and seeing and how does it come to shape? It seems as though the creature is born with very little direction. There's not, there is an argument there that there's not much that's predetermined. He's observed. He has to kind of form himself in the wild and through the observation of a country family, and through exchange, through gathering firewood and things like this. There's this, kind of trust that starts to develop. But that said, it's the trust is only formed really through the father of this country family, who is of course blind. So that sort of adds a whole other element to it.
Right. So many things.
Yeah. What's interesting about the story and what really was kind of dumbfounded a lot of critics in 1818 was that by the end of it you have so much sympathy for the creature, and that's definitely deliberate on the part of Mary Shelley. You begin with a thought of, Victor Frankenstein, he was really just trying his best and things went awry, and then by the end of it you're realizing, no, this creature's becoming, someone of great substance, So that's something that I think really brought about some moral dilemmas to critics of that time in a way.
And then interesting how the image has been taken and used in so many very superficial and silly ways over the centuries.
Yeah, the scene of the crime begins in 1931 with the Frankenstein, the Hollywood classic with Boris Karloff's Yeah, representation of the creature, and it's sort of, I think it seems as though that's the period when you start to see this conflation between Victor Frankenstein, and the creature, right? I grew up thinking that Frankenstein was the creature, and then,
I think everybody thinks that unless they read the book.
I know, right?
Yeah.
And suddenly you're sort of thrown for a loop. And in the book, it's the creature. It actually does not have a name.
So Spencer, tell us the story of how this book came to be.
Well, there's with the formation of it, the origins of it. There are several different stories. There's the first one, which we all sort of know of, a famous ghost competition that was put together in 1816 in Lake Geneva, and it's Lord Byron's there, and Percy B. Shelley, and Mary Shelley, of course, and Claire Clairmont, and a physician who was a friend of Byron's. And that story goes that Mary Shelley sort of presented it to the group, and they were just blown away by it. This is actually an origin story that she put together herself.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's one that was published in an introduction in the 1831 edition. So that was the third edition of Frankenstein, and it seems as though she's trying to make justification for the story to the public. How could a woman at this period be writing something like this? It's outrageous and all this stuff. So she's kind of describing it as a dream that came to her, and it has this kind of alienating effect to, something that was indeed a preoccupation in her life, death, basically. Shortly after her birth, Mary Wollstonecraft, who was her mother, died of an infection, and so she grew up without a mother, and then herself she had a child who died shortly after she gave birth to it, and when she was about 16 years old.
Huh.
There were other deaths that were quite close to her and her family. So it was something that she actually wrote about in her diaries prior to 1816 when she writes this story.
The whole idea of like you say, a preoccupation with death.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to say that when she first publishes the book in 1818, it's anonymous. She doesn't actually have her name associated with it, and there's speculation that she did this because she was so worried that the public would be so surprised by a woman making a story of this kind that they would perhaps take her child away from her. By this point, she had already had a child during the time when she was writing it, and by the time she published it in 1818, she had her second child. So, that was something that was the forefront of her mind. Yeah.
So is there any thought then, or any way of determining, you were saying that story was one that she developed later on, kind of an exercise in almost like PR in a way.
Yeah.
Is there any idea of what actually led to writing this book, or where it was actually written? Well,
she records having, after the loss of her first child, she records having dreams in which the child is there again.
Mm.
That the child was just sleeping, and then she warmed the child up, and the child was revived. Also, at that time, there's discussions of reanimation going on just generally.
What do you mean?
Well, there were interests in Erasmus Darwin and other scientists who were sort of trying to explore the idea of bringing people back to life, and there was a mix between sort of a soft science, let's say, and occult practices at that time. Often, Mary Shelley actually associates a discussion that they'd had before she went to bed in 1816 in Lake Geneva at that villa about reanimation. So, she sort of says that it stirred up some visions in her mind while she was sleeping, and that's how the story came to be.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So interesting. Yeah. Now, this has led to so many books and movies and series and I don't know what else, but it's just the Frankenstein has captured our imaginations for all of these 200 years.
Absolutely. And quickly. 1818 when it comes out. They publish a second edition in 1823, and that one comes. That's the first publication with her name on it, and that comes actually after a play that they did of Frankenstein, in which she attended it with her father, William Godwin, who is also a celebrated writer. And basically they saw just how big of a success it was, and that's often associated with why they did a second edition. The father oversaw it and said, "All right, we gotta get going on this. This is quite something." And of course, actually, as she anticipated, there was a lot of surprise once she put her name to that story. She's about 25 years old when that comes out, and people were absolutely shocked. Initially, when it was published, they thought it was actually associated with Percy Bysshe Shelley, her husband, because he was overseeing the editing of it, and also the dedication at the front of the book. In the 1818 edition, there's a dedication to William Godwin, who is, of course, Mary's father, but also a mentor for Percy Bysshe. So there's all these kind of speculations as to who did it in the beginning.
So are there many copies that exist from the earliest publication, the first publication?
Yeah, so the initial publication, they made only 500 copies. And there's record on the books for Lackington and Company, who were the publishers of the first edition, that 6 copies were given to Mary Shelley, and she sort of passed them on to other people. Those ones are really sort of prized ones because they're interesting to see who she's handing them out to, especially because it's anonymous. So she's really giving it to a kind of smaller circle of people.
Who did she give them to?
Well, of those copies, only 2 exist to our knowledge. The first one is in the Morgan Library, and that was given to a Miss Thomas, who was, I'm assuming, a family friend. Huh. But the other one has actually gotten a bit of coverage in recent years, in 2011, and that one was an associated copy to Lord Byron. Huh. And that one was kind of an interesting story. It's connected around a gentleman who's now actually a bookseller, but at the time was just a 20-year-old graduate of a literary program in Oxford, and he was actually going over to help his grandparent clean out the house, basically clean out a book collection of his deceased grandfather. It was named by the man of Douglas J. And he was a politician, and he collected books, but it was not really, he wasn't a major book collector. But when Sammy J, who's the man who found the copy, was looking through his grandfather's library, he noticed a sort of small book, and he took it off the shelf, and lo and behold, it says Frankenstein, and within it there's an inscription to Lord Byron from the author. And unfortunately, so when it was originally published in 1818, it actually came as 3 volumes. Oh. So there's only 1 volume that exists of this associated copy. It's the first volume, which is generally what happens with an associated copy. It's written in the first volume, but really not in any other ones.
What a thing to pull off the shelf.
Absolutely.
Could you imagine?
Yeah, it'd be insane. Yeah. So, but yeah, absolutely an incredible associated copy. And what's interesting is that how it actually got to that place. It was a bit strange for someone who wasn't really a large book collector to have this copy. And really, it's a source of a little bit of speculation. But what we believe happened was that Douglas J was friends with John Murray VI, who was connected to the John Murray family, who were major book publishers and booksellers, and it's believed that it was probably gifted to him at some point in the 20th century, at a time when it was probably not perceived with as much magnitude as it is today. Probably sometime in the 30s or something like this, and it was passed through the family. We know because Lord Byron actually was corresponding with one of the ancestors of that family, saying, this is a pretty good book if you get a chance to take a look at it. It's not bad for an 18-year-old girl, was what he sort of rather condescendingly said.
Oh my God!
Yeah, and when Lord Byron died in Greece, they brought back about 5 boxes of his personal library, of which they believe it was probably a part of that. And of course, the friend picked it up when he got a chance, and then it passed through the family, and here it is today. I think it's in a private collection now.
How interesting.
Yeah.
Spencer, thank you so much for coming in to talk about all this.
Thank you for having me.
That is Spencer Stuart, and he's going to be a regular guest around here this season talking about the history of books, and he also works as an independent advisor for people with collections. He's based in Vancouver, and this year's the 200th publishing anniversary of Mary Shelley's classic Frankenstein.